Hello, everyone. I'm Mary Jones, and I serve as chair of the Marriage and Family Therapy Advisory Committee of the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Today is Friday, February 13th, 2026. I ask the members of the advisory committee to respond to roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that's being conducted remotely by conference call and other electronic medium. Jim Kilmartin,
Present.
Nicole Eitzen,
Present.
Chris Haben,
Present.
Betsy Henderson.
Just joined.
Thank you. Stacy Hodges. Not yet.
He is
Renisha.
logging into the waiting room.
Okay, she's hogging in right now. Great. Renisha Hunter,
Present.
Diane Siebel,
Present.
and Heidi Vella.
Here.
I note the following BSRB are also present: David Fye
Here.
and Leslie Allen.
Here.
Next, David Fye will read a message regarding this meeting being conducted remotely.
Thank you, Mary. This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about any concerns, but the Open Meetings Act, or the COMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the Executive Director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. No time has been reserved for public comment, as no individuals requested time for public comment. Because we are conducting this public meeting remotely by conference call and other teleconference ability, I state for the record the following information. Public access to this meeting is being conducted by medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call and on the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of the COMA are not suspended. Therefore, we will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the COMA. On January 15th, 2026, we sent notice of the advisory committee meeting to all individuals who have requested notice of such meetings. The notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other meeting material have been posted on the board's website and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda specifically by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line "Request for the agenda," and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel that allows the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if we have any technical issues during the meeting, you may call the board office at 785-296-3240 or send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of this meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. And the conference call line is live. I did check it before we got started. There's no one currently on the line, but if I hear someone connect and introduce themselves, I will let you know.
Okay, thank you very much, Dave. The first item of business for us is agenda review and approval. Were there any comments, thoughts, changes? If not, I'll take a motion to approve the agenda.
Mary, this is Stacy Hodges. I had technical difficulties, so if you want to make sure that you got me on the roll call, and I would make a motion to approve the agenda.
Thank you, Stacy. Is there a second?
I
Second.
second. Oh.
All right, we'll take Jim as the second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. Okay, great. Well, Dave, we're going to hand it back to you for the executive director's report.
Okay. Thank you, Mary. And now, was there a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting?
I'm sorry. Thank you for keeping me back on track. Sorry about that, everyone. Yes, next item of business is the minutes from the last meeting. So if everyone's had a chance to look at those.
Move to approve.
Thank you, Jim. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank
That was
you. All those in
Betsy.
favor. Okay, thanks, Betsy. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. All right, thank you. And David, now it's time for your report.
Thank you, Mary. Well, let's go ahead and jump into some legislative updates. So during this part of the year, the legislature meets for about 90 days, and there are a number of hearings and other items relevant to the BSRB. So I want to provide a couple updates to you. One, as far as just a general budget update. As a state agency, the BSRB provides a estimated budget of expenditures and revenue coming into the agency That is submitted to the Division of the Budget and then the Legislative Research Department by October 1st every year, usually closer to about September 15th. And then that is reviewed in traditional years. The governor has made recommendations and then released those the first week in January. And then the legislature used that as their budgetary starting point. And then the House and the Senate made further adjustments as they came up with their own appropriations bills and then worked together on sort of a composite bill that they would run across both chambers' floors. Last year, the legislature decided to use a new process. And so rather than follow the governor's recommendation and make adjustments from that, the legislature started having some interim budget committees meet and put together their own appropriations bill. And so they are repeating that process this year. So in the fall of 2025, a number of the legislative budget committees, they had a special committee that met during most of the interim. And then the week before the legislative session actually started in January, a few different budget committees were approved to meet to do some budget hearings. And the BSRB was asked to be one of those agencies that was presenting our budget. And so we did that before the session even began. Now, when the session started, they made recommendations and they provided a lot of positive feedback and comments about the agency and ultimately agreed with what we had requested in terms of our limitation for expenditures in both fiscal years, fiscal year 26 and also 27. And then that was provided to the House Appropriations Committee. The Budget Committee chair reported out the recommendations from the committee, and House Appropriations confirmed without any further changes or really very much discussion or questions. And so the BSRB budget is now one of the available budgets when the House puts together their appropriations bill. This week in House Appropriations, they have been essentially working their bill and considering other adjustments or items that would affect all agencies or specific items for certain agencies. They are expected to wrap up that part of the process this morning. And so they may be doing that as we speak, but that is anticipated. And so what that means is if they do close that process today, potentially they would have an appropriations bill available to be worked on the House floor as early as next week. So on the Senate side, traditionally we would follow a similar approach. We would be asked to present the budget for the agency in a Senate subcommittee. Sometimes standing committees have had those. Last year, they made a decision that if there were not significant items in agencies' budgets, some of those smaller agencies wouldn't have full hearings. And so they did the same process this year and essentially concurred with what the House had decided. And so we are just waiting to see right now if there's any other items that will come up. But from a budgetary standpoint, that process has worked very smoothly for us. But we're always happy to answer questions or participate in whichever version of the items they would like us to do. As it relates to other items, there's a number of bills that come before the legislature every year. There's a number of health committees and other committees that might touch upon some of the topics that involve the BSRB. And so I wanted to make you aware of a few bills that have been moving through the process this year. We have been talking a little bit about the regulation of artificial intelligence, and then there was a bill that received a hearing earlier this week in the House Legislative Modernization Committee. That is House Bill 2592. It would create the Kansas Task Force on Artificial Intelligence and Emerging Technologies and study such technologies and make recommendations to the legislature. So we'll be trying to track that bill to see if it progresses all the way through this year. That's House Bill 2592. Additionally, there is a bill that received a hearing on Monday of this week in the Senate Fed and State Affairs Committee. That is Senate Bill 405. It would make it unlawful for a person to knowingly train artificial intelligence to encourage or support suicide or the unlawful killing of another person. It would also make it unlawful for them to provide emotional support, develop emotional relationships, act as a healthcare professional, simulate human, or encourage isolation. So that bill was in the Senate Fed and State Committee earlier this week, Senate Bill 405. There is also a bill that touches upon the topic of DEI, and that was heard earlier this week. Actually, I think it was the initial hearing was probably about 2 weeks ago, and then it was worked this week on Wednesday in the House Education Committee, House Bill 2428. And the published description of that bill is it would require the State Board of Regents to establish curricula and designate courses at post-secondary educational institutions relating to DEI/CRT, related courses and content, and require the study of American institutions and certain programs at freshman orientation concerning free speech. I don't have a lot of detail about that bill, but if you are interested in kind of following the legislative conversation on the topic of DEI this year, I think that's one of the bills to be tracking. Again, that's House Bill 2428. Some other items that I think may be relevant to some of the other professions, but I think are helpful for you to be aware of as well. There is a bill, House Bill 2352, which would require a duly ordained minister of religion to report certain abuse and neglect, except when reporting would violate the penitential communication privilege and require training. That bill had hearings originally scheduled that were moved a couple times, so I'm unsure where that bill currently is, whether it's going to be moved this session or not, but that is House Bill 2352. There is also House Bill 2420, which would require parental consent prior to the provision of any school-based mental health service to a student. That was introduced by Representative Steele, and it has been in the the Education Committee. And I believe it received a hearing back in January 22nd. They did move that bill out of committee favorably for passage back on February 3rd. So that is a bill that does appear to be moving, House Bill 2420. There's also an interesting bill that the number of this bill is escaping me, but essentially there was a bill that was introduced last year that would make, there it is, House Bill 2480. And it would create an exception to certain mandatory reporting obligations for licensed social workers who are working under the supervision of an attorney. And it would permit the social worker or the attorney to keep ethical obligations of the attorney-client privilege while working under the supervision of the attorney, essentially as a defense if they did not disclose something under the mandatory reporting laws. So this has kind of been a conflict of law. There was a similar bill that was heard and moved out of committee last year, but died on a legislative calendar. But this year, House Bill 2480 is a new version of the same concepts, but it is limited to just the social work profession right now. And it is basically targeted at social workers who might learn information within the context of their employment at a law firm, where the information that they would learn would fall under the mandatory reporting obligation, but also it would fall under the attorney-client privilege. And so right now they're being pulled in two different directions. This bill would essentially create a defense for either the social worker to exert the ability not to disclose that information as a mandatory reporter, or allow the law firm to exert that over the social worker. So that is the bill that is moving forward this year, House Bill 2480. So I'll give you some updates on that later on this year. And then the last bill I'll just kind of touch upon is House Bill 2506. And this is a bill that involves the addiction counseling profession, but it was scheduled for a hearing in the Health and Human Services Committee for the House. It would have created a new type of license for the addiction counseling profession called an apprentice addiction counselor license. When that bill was introduced, the bill appeared to lack educational qualifications and training requirements, and we took this bill to the board specifically to ask the board for feedback. And so the board did express concerns on a number of different things, especially given the scope of practice described in the bill, given the lack of educational and training requirements and some other items of note. And so it was the board's position to go ahead and introduce opposing testimony. And in between, when the hearing was scheduled, we were able to meet with the chair and some of the stakeholders, and were able to try to come up with a compromise solution behind the scenes. Ultimately, we were not able to reach a conclusion on a recommended course of action, but we did pledge to continue to work with the stakeholders to try to come up with something that would meet the workforce goals and also the concerns by the other individuals and affected parties. And so we're going to try to continue to work on another alternate proposal this year. But I did want to make you aware of that. It had been scheduled for a couple of different hearings, and then the hearings were canceled because there was a lot of work behind the scenes on that bill. Again, that is House Bill 2506. Moving next to some updates from most recent board meetings. I do try to keep you aware of the items that are coming up or the items that have happened at recent board meetings. The last full board meeting was Monday, January 12th. And at that full board meeting, the board considered possible legislation for this year. There were a few items the board was interested in moving forward on. In our preparation for this session, we had heard the legislature might really be moving extremely quickly this session. And we had also heard perhaps it was advisable to continue to work on some of those concepts without introducing legislation this year, and that it would likely be recommended that we would wait until next year to introduce legislation. That things might be received better by the legislature if we were to work on things a bit more and then perhaps introduce something in the future rather than this session. And so ultimately, the board decided not to introduce legislation, but we are continuing to work on some of those concepts to see if we can address some of those issues in other ways. And also on some of the items that require some additional discussion, we're trying to work more with the affected groups of individuals to see if we can come to some sort of compromise solutions on some of these items as well. The board is also able to take some steps forward on its continuing review of the unprofessional conduct recommended changes, moving forward with that grid of looking at all the different items and trying to see if we can standardize language across professions. For your profession, there were some recommended changes that had been forwarded to the board, and the board did go ahead and review those. We had brought a number of regulations to your committee. You had made some recommended changes. The board agreed with those changes. Those will be forwarded through the process. Just for clarification, that is KAR 102-5-4A, 4B, 5, 6A, 9, 9A, and 14. So all the ones that were forwarded, the board went ahead and recommended those to move forward. Also, the board expressed a desire to continue work on a strategic plan for the BSRB. The board met in the fall and expressed a desire to put something together that would be a multi-year plan to kind of show direction for where the agency could go in the next few years. And then, as I mentioned, given House Bill 2506, we asked the board members to attend a very short board meeting that was on Tuesday, January 27th. And so the purpose of that meeting was to review legislation primarily focused on House Bill 2506. And the board members were able to hear summary information of that bill, some of the ongoing conversations, and then express a position for testimony. Ultimately, the bill didn't receive a hearing this session, but I understand that, the advocates are satisfied with the result for right now, and we will continue to work with the interested parties to see if we can come up with a good idea of something for next session. So with that, I'll go ahead and end my report and see if there's any questions on any of the legislative items or anything from the most recent board meetings.
Okay, I don't see any hands up or anyone comments or thoughts for Dave. Okay, thank you very much. The next item of business here is the continued review and discussion of the draft survey of licensees. And, one of the items we were talking about from the last meeting is we've done sort of the most work in talking about the highlighted items, but we really wanted to see if there were opportunities from the data that came out of that, of things that we might want to take forward this year as the advisory committee and have work items established as a result of them. So I know in your packets, Dave sent that as well. Let me pull that back up here. And just wondered if there were items from this that you felt strongly that we should bring forward as topics or work items for this year. I know we talked about some things in the last meeting too, just thinking about the things that were noted and more of the general comments. So if there's anything in that section you want to point to, or certainly we could ask you to review that information and be prepared for the next meeting to come up with items for this, or, we don't have to do anything with them, but it seems to me like there were items that were called out around technology use, or still some things around supervision role of the BSRB or advisory committee or anything along those lines. So what I would ask of the advisory committee is, between now and the next committee meeting, if you would review that content and look at those comments and just see if there are things that pull out that we could tackle this year in our advisory committee. I think it would be well worth our time to utilize the data that we have to think about what next steps we could do to enhance what's happening for licensees here. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next item of business, which is the discussion of regulation of artificial intelligence. And as Dave mentioned in his report, there are things coming from, around artificial intelligence. Several states around here are starting to enact some type of guardrails. And if I remember, I was trying to pull it up, and Chris, you might have this handier than I do, but I do believe AAMFT had a statement around AI. I was trying to pull that up for the meeting and kind of ran out of time. So just want to open up discussion on that. If there are any thoughts, we've been bringing this item back and decided we would continue to bring this item back up because it's a ever-present item for us.
Mary, are you referencing the code of ethics, how they added
Yes.
that? Okay, yeah.
And I think I came across, there's the National Board for Certified Counselors has an ethical principles for artificial intelligence and counseling. So I can share that document as well. Oh, we don't have chat enabled, so I'll send it to Dave. I'll send it to Dave so we can send that out. But that might also be, as we look at talking more in depth around this topic, I thought there were some really good pieces in there. And a lot of them, just like the AAMFT Code of Ethics, I think speaks to what we were talking about, general enough around safeguards and consent, and sort of this idea of don't use anything you don't have knowledge of. Is really, I think, the smartest way to approach that. So I'll make sure to send that out too. But any comments or thoughts around this topic?
I was kind of curious with Dr. Haben, since you're in the university.
Nicole, your volume went out.
Me?
No, yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, I was curious, Dr. Haben, what the conversations might be in the university spaces on how we're bringing up students with some of this. And yeah, if there's any conversations there, that would be helpful also with this.
I feel like I can't speak for all, but I feel like it's similar to the conversations we're having here. Any tool has advantages to it. If I'm honest, I'm finding some applications for AI, just in terms, like, for example, I'm teaching a diagnostic class. I'm finding Chat GPT or something like that to be helpful to say, can you develop a case study for me that meets, and there can be a tool for that can aid in instruction. I would imagine that students can use that. At the same time, I think one of the things that we're wrestling with, something that just happened recently, is also having tools where from students or things are generated. Are they generated from AI, or are they generated from their own mind? So how do you use tools from like Turnitin and other sources to determine what might be an AI piece. When it comes to the clinical side of things, again, the things that we've talked about here of I think Jim had talked about this, AI can be a very useful tool, but you're signing your name on whatever tool you're using, and so there's a responsibility to that. We are not here in Kansas City, we don't use AI technology yet for note taking and um, progress notes and case file kind of management sorts of things, though those tools are probably on the horizon. So we're not utilizing them at present. I think those are so like again, I just taught the ethics class. So as Mary was speaking to, like paying attention to what's coming out of the code just came out in December and we had a class the first week of January. So I was kind of scrambling to keep up with the new 2026 code on focusing on technology assisted sorts of things. And I think again, there's like any time there's something new, there's usefulness as to the tools, and there's always a downside to that. So how are we making sure that we are still maintaining confidentiality, protecting um, those things? I was glad to hear what David was reporting in terms of um, making people aware of what AI can do in terms of, AI is going to it's become, I mean, people are turning to AI. So what is, I wonder if some of the, we are, I think our numbers have been a bit down this year in terms of client presentation. And are people turning to AI as a solution? And then the concern coming of AI is going to tell you what you want to hear, at least in its current programming. So I don't know, Nicole, if that's is a good response, but those are some of the things that we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think what I observed, I mean, we've talked about this. It's just so rapidly growing, and so like I've had conversations with folks at like the Friends program in Wichita, for instance, and they've been really great dialogues. It's just it's hard until we get some maybe regulation in the state eventually. It's again, it's just moving so fast. And so, right now, I think students in a lot of programs, probably across the US, aren't able to use some of that with good reason. And then they graduate and then they're bombarded with all of these options. And, you hope that they can cling to all the ethics training that they got, and, think through all of that before they make a decision on how to implement those things. So, um, there's just a lot of domino effects to whatever may come with some of that, and so as we've gotten students out of school, and other programs are like this too, not just MFT. So social work. We have mental health counseling students, and so it just depends on the program, what they will allow or not allow. And so I just been thinking about the student side of things, that just all that they're soaking in, and then they're being bombarded by that when they graduate. So thanks for sharing, Dr. Haben. I appreciate it.
I've not used or seen, and maybe I'm showing my age, the kind of technology in an office space like mine, where I don't know what kind of equipment is needed that, I realize Zoom right now could create a transcript of our meeting. So I'm sure it's similar technology, but I don't know how things are set up in an office, if I have microphones built into the ceiling, or if it's just more available that people know that whatever I'm saying can be transcribed into my notes. That's kind of cool on one level, but it for me, I'm pretty conservative in terms of that really scares me. And so I think as people are becoming more familiar with that technology, making sure that their informed consent is clear, and that the clients might even have an opt-out option of that, and making sure how is that going to impact HIPAA compliance and a number of other things. So I think in our clinical instruction, as we have more students going out into placement sites that might be utilizing technologies that we ourselves are not, at least here at the university, those are going to be issues that I think are going to come to play.
I've actually looked at it before and it's as simple as your phone,
Yeah. Wow.
where you
Yeah,
can just
Have your,
yeah,
have your iPad out kind of thing. You know?
Mhm.
yep, and it transcribes the session. We'll put it into a SOAP note and then you can edit it
Wow.
and upload. I mean, it's
Well-
as basic as having your phone there. I've never done it. I've looked at it a couple of times and talked with clients about it and have never pulled the trigger on it.
So the technology is there to even have the content not just be transcribed, but interpreted into EBP and using that language. So if you have a template that you're using for an evidence-based practice, then it fills in the blanks, so to speak.
I was at a meeting last week with some colleagues who were talking about one of them was an auditor, quality auditor, and the clinician was using ambient listening to transcribe notes and wasn't reading the notes. And what looked like sort of a hallucination in AI, the auditor said, "What is this?" Well, it was picking up a conversation from someone outside the therapy room. And so there was another whole set of people's names and identifiers in this note. So yeah, there's lots of safeguards I think that need to be put in place. But the technologies are, are good. They have great place and great applicability, but we just have to ensure, however we as regulators put something in place, it's like, what are those safeguards to ensure that we can't replace the clinician altogether, right? There has to be some oversight.
I wanted to comment on this because I'm using a note taker, and it's just a computer. It's just my phone that listens in, but it doesn't know the difference. And so there will be times that, just like as a therapist, you're kind of joining, and like, so for example, I have young kids, and if I have a client that has young kids, we might like get on a topic of, oh yeah, we didn't sleep last night, or whatever. And AI will think that what I said about myself is what the client said about them. And so I think there is some, and I don't know how to regulate this, but there definitely has to be a review of what it's listening to, because it's just a computer. It's not a person. It can't figure out what's happening there in those nuances.
I've seen the ethical implications, even with just, previously just transcription services in notes, where the prescriber, even, regular doctors, they'll put, well, this was transcribed such and such, and, there might be errors. Well, it's still your responsibility as the person signing off on the note. And I think, if anything, that would be something that we could insist on and regulate, that if you're you don't get to put a disclaimer in there that I used AI and, there might be errors. No, it's still your responsibility because you're signing the note. So just kind of being overt about that, I think would be good. Because I see it quite frequently in older notes, where there's the transcription, like, is it Dragon Speak and some other things like that? Yeah.
David or Mary, has this group received the sample regulations that some of the board has from, for instance, the state of Utah, which was very in-depth?
Yeah, I think this group received that report from Utah, and then also the 3 different bills that were passed last year, one from Illinois, one from Utah, and one from Nevada. So.
Okay, because I see the Utah one as being very, very deep as far as what it covers. And when we talk about regulation, I just see something like that coming down the pipe. And I think it's important for this group to weigh in on what they might think goes too far or doesn't go far enough. Everything we've talked about as far as your notes and note taking and stuff, none of that is going to stop. We're all responsible for things that we sign. pretty soon you're probably going to have a holographic image on your desk that you can talk to and restructure the note. Who knows? But this regulation, I think, has to happen, because I am more concerned about bots setting themselves up as a practitioner, therapist, and people logging in and really not talking to a real person. I just think that's the next fraud piece that's going to come about. And they may look like any one of us.
Yeah, I think from a statutory standpoint, the bill that may be the most timely will maybe that Senate Bill 405 that's currently being considered, because it would have a direct connection to AI and also specifically the health fields. And also, we could approach this topic in other ways too, through the regulation and connecting it to unprofessional conduct from practitioners. Kind of like what we've been discussing a little bit with the informed consent and perhaps the ability to opt out, and then the confidentiality aspects too. So,
Record keeping, documentation.
Yeah, these are all very good points.
Because another thing, it would be like the storage of those transcripts and storage of those, and now those are, disposed of after the note is written. So those are other areas.
We'll be sure to share out this resource too. And then if you haven't seen the 2026 Code of Ethics, it'll be helpful for you to look at those statements. But I do think we're probably nearing the time where recommended language is going to come from the advisory groups, because there's just been so much discussion around it.
David, what was that bill you referenced here a minute ago?
It is Senate Bill 405.
405.
It's being considered in the Senate Committee on Federal and State Affairs. I think it had a hearing earlier this week. It doesn't look like the committee's taken further action on it yet, but it would be Senate Bill 405.
Thank you.
And it's not a very long bill. It's only 3 pages here, but it does appear that it's creating brand new law as opposed to amending existing law. So all of it should be new language to be looked at.
Okay, well, we will continue to bring this topic up, and we'll share some resources between now and the next meeting too, so we can begin thinking about if we are ready to draft something. And certainly we'll see what this bill does too, because that could shape a little bit of how we approach this. Okay, well, I'll move on to new business items. We had the KAR 102-510, continuing education for licensees.
And I can frame this discussion a little bit. At the last meeting, we had a conversation about, are there things that the BSRB could be helpful with in terms of supporting licensees in the area of safety? And we talked a little bit about how the social work profession does have a one-time requirement for new social workers to do a safety training. And well, I think, even though I know that training is very valuable for the social workers, it might be difficult for us to add a requirement for other professions. We talked a little bit about the language in KAR 102-5-10 on continuing education. And perhaps that might be a way to approach this topic, to put a spotlight on perhaps training for licensees in the area of safety training. And so I included a copy of that regulation in your packet. That regulation outlines what is suitable to be counted for continuing education every 2 years when you maintain your license, and the different areas that are covered. And then at the bottom of that regulation in section G, it lists items that are not covered specifically. And so G says approval shall not be granted for any of the following: first aid, CPR, infection control, or occupational health and safety courses. In-service training, if this training is for job orientation or job training or is specific to the employing agency. Or 3, any activity for which the licensee cannot demonstrate to the board's satisfaction that the program's goals and objectives are to enhance the licensee's practice, ethics, value, skill, or knowledge in marriage and family therapy. So Leslie and I had a conversation about this from a standpoint, and I'll defer to Leslie to see if she has any thoughts that she would like to share for the group. So Leslie Allen, the Assistant Director and Licensing Manager for the board, I'll turn over to her. So.
Good morning. So when Dave and I spoke about this, I talked a little bit about what needs to be included if we count social work safety training. And it's not just active shooter, that kind of training. It's not just physical defense, defending yourself. It's a combination. It has to include, the information about the client, escalation, de-escalation. What do you do as a professional when this happens after after it happens? And then there is some, physical, they go over some moves like to defend yourself to get away. If it comes to that and you have to, to physically interact with this person, then you do that. But still, then after that, you still have to follow certain protocol because it's your client and so it's not just occupational training. It's still focused on on a professional, not just the occupation.
Yeah, because we talked about, could this be addressed if we just removed or recommended to the advisory committee removing certain language from the prohibited list, because it talks about not counting occupational health and safety courses. We were saying, well, what if we just, considered removing the prohibition about counting occupational safety courses? Well, the problem with that is you can remove language from a statute or regulation for a specific reason, but then when the language is gone, it's really hard to point to it and say the intention behind this missing language is this, because people will forget that the language was ever there in the first place. Or they might consider, how broadly do you interpret safety? Does that cover, And so I think probably a better solution may be for the advisory committee to consider adding a new category under the items that are specifically counted, that might address some of these topics that we talked about. And then similarly, most of these items also say what the maximum number of hours that could be counted in this area are for a time period. So you'd want to basically clarify what things you'd want to include in that category, and then what is the maximum number of hours someone could count in that category within the 2-year time period.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you talk about it, I have always interpreted the safety and occupational things like my slips and falls training I do isn't going to count for continuing ed. And I hadn't really thought about it in terms of like, safety awareness or, in practice. So I think those are nice opportunities for us to add additional thoughts without requiring anything, because I think we know that requiring additional continuing ed is probably not going to be a positive move.
And the board attempted a few years back to say, let's lower one requirement to make another requirement, that we value both of these. And the legislative direction at that time was saying, well, we don't agree with the one that you want to add, but we'll continue to accept that decrease. And so I don't think that was what the board envisioned when they made the proposal in the legislation. So I agree. If you want to address it through this continuing education regulation, it might be best to just go ahead and come up with some wording that really focuses on this point, and then we could even spotlight this as a new addition to the regulation, which I think would add more visibility and then may in and of itself encourage more people to do that training.
I was also gonna add that, if an LMFT or LCMFT took like a social work safety training course, we wouldn't deny that if they were audited. I mean, current practice, it wouldn't be denied. So it simply would be putting it in the language so that more people are aware that that's an option.
I think that it's going to be a challenge to find some of those courses outside of a facility. So talking about private practice. So, at my current facility, we have a de-escalation and risk mitigation course that we're required to take. At my previous facility, we had the same thing. So those would have counted from what we're talking about. However, those in private practice are going to be very limited in that access. So, just acknowledging that there's opportunities out there, maybe through social work, or, if someone at a facility, I'm thinking specifically like Johnson County Mental Health, were to open that up to private practice folks, that could be an opportunity. So.
Yeah, good thoughts. Other thoughts on this item?
Does anybody know if there's like a national training that would suffice that could be online? That I know we can't recommend something, but something that fits those as an example? Online training?
Well, I think some of the things I've seen, and I can't call to it offhand, Stacy, but I've seen some of the things around the social work standard for safety training, and I think there are a number of things available that meet that qualification. I just can't pinpoint it right now.
I know we did have one specifically that was pre-approved, and it was online, but last time I checked, I couldn't find it online when I clicked on the link. So I don't know if she's still providing that. Somewhere I have a list.
And maybe this is something that we could take to national organization or something, to, because most states are now requiring it, a safety component. So maybe that's something we could task and ask.
Any other thoughts on this discussion item? Okay. Well, we are rolling right through our agenda here. So the next item was discussion topics for 2026. Thinking through things that our committee might want to take up. If there are any thoughts about items we either want to bring in, we can always bring in someone to speak and advise to us. Other topics, things that have been on your mind.
I have two things, Mary, if I can speak to them.
Yes.
One, I would like to learn more, talk more about the future of compacts as it would relate to marriage and family therapy in particular. It seems like we're behind what most other disciplines are doing. And I'm in line with our conversation about AI, relating that to technology, that since COVID, that genie's out of the bottle. I mean, people are just, it's rolling, and I would very much like for us to have discussion about that. I've appreciated learning things I hadn't thought of when that I found that David has shared. It's been very helpful. Like, what does that mean for income to different boards? And there's so many unintended sorts of things that I'm just not thinking about like that would be really helpful. And I'd like to understand more about that and what we can be doing. As one thing. The second thing, I don't know if it actually is something that is germane to this area, but I do have a measure of concern because at the federal level, the Department of Education right now is classifying or actually reclassifying MFTs and other healthcare workers, including nurses, as not as professional, but as graduate programs, which is cutting in half what they can acquire in loans. Obviously, as a person who's working in the university, that gives me significant concern. Again, I don't know if it's germane here in terms of what this body can do, but one thing I have also appreciated from the regulatory board is hearing more and more about an intention about how do we keep mental health providers here and how do we make Kansas a state that's welcoming to that. I'm really worried about what this is going to do in terms of people making a career in MFT as well as the other disciplines in mental health and otherwise. I think that's going to cut us at the knees. And I have some grave concern about if this goes to plan, what that could mean. So again, I don't know that there's anything that this group really can do, and or if it's meritorious for this body to be having that conversation. But I'm pretty concerned about it.
Be happy
Yeah,
to-
I think, go ahead.
I was just going to say I'd be happy to gather some information if everybody's not familiar with some of those actions. I'd be happy to kind of pull some news on that, and then we could share it at one of the meetings as a beginning of that conversation.
Yeah, I think as those things relate to the field and could eventually, I guess, have impacts to licensure as well. They're great topics to bring, and I think we should, if nothing else, stay on top of and being informed about those things.
One thing
Any
that I
other-
would ask is if we could pull some data. It was in 2021 that I believe it was the Kansas Mental Health Institute had some clear data and reports in regard to LPMHC or LPCs and MFTs and hiring, pay, just kind of clear data that could be used. It was 2021, so just post COVID, and that's been 5 years. And so it'd be nice to see, average wages, where people are licensed, where they're working, those kinds of things. And so I haven't seen any updates to that information from that entity. And so I don't know how easy that would be. Just,
Dave,
and I don't
do you
know if
think that's the KHI? That was the Kansas Health Institute report? Is that what you're referred to?
I think so. But again, it's 5 years old. So
Yeah, I could take a look at that. I have not heard anything recent from that group.
it didn't look like there was anything recent on their website. So I was challenged with that when looking up new data.
Yeah, I seem to recall there were some problems with those reports when they initially came out. They did reach out to us and we expressed some concerns, but they went ahead and published the data as it was, unfortunately, without a lot of adjustments. They had and I was very direct with them about this, and we even did a webinar where I expressed these thoughts. So this is nothing outside of things behind the scenes, but I really felt like they underreported the number of licensees for the BSRB. They used some optional survey data, and so if people chose not to respond to the survey, they were not included. They didn't include any of our individuals that are licensed that live out of state or maybe have a official address out of state. We have some people that may spend colder weather or seasons in a different place and then come here. And so they really they also had another restriction where they only included people that had voluntarily said they work above a certain number of hours. So there were three factors at least that come to mind right away. And they basically said, we're going to exclude anybody who doesn't fall into these categories, and we're just going to look at this one section that meets these criteria, and we're going to report this as the workforce. And so in some of those areas, it felt like they were reporting our total number of licensees at about a third or less compared to what we actually have. And like I said, we had expressed those concerns in the draft stage. They went ahead and published, and it is helpful in terms of seeing some of that information, but in actually getting a real snapshot of everything, there were some pieces that were missing. And like I said, that is nothing new today. I expressed that, and we did a little webinar with both their organization, and I represented the BSRB on that. It was a lunch and learn. And so I shared these comments then too. But in terms of new data, I haven't heard anything that they have
Okay.
recently.
Yeah, the data was very inaccurate because I started pulling numbers myself, and so I was tabulating about a 40% difference. And then LPCs and LMFTs were kind of lumped together from what I remember from that report. And so it wasn't differentiating out because it was just a mental health workforce kind of plan and going forward. So it was very generalized, and I was looking for things more specific. So I just was curious about that. So thank you.
Sure. Yeah. And that kind of thing is tricky. I don't think they were trying to do anything
No.
purposely. It's just, these things are very complex, and we live in the weeds when it comes to our licensee totals and those kind of numbers. And I think that they were trying to put out helpful information, but sometimes when you do that, if you don't have, the right sampling group or something, and then you draw conclusions from that,
Yeah.
it can lead to some assumptions that are not necessarily true. So yeah, but I'll look and see if not from that group, maybe there's another group that has been collecting that data and make it available.
I just think that would be helpful for us to know, like, true shortage, mental health shortage numbers and things of that sort. So thank you.
Sure. Yeah, and that gets complicated a little bit too, with some individuals who might hold a license in a couple different professions. And we even found that to be true across agencies. I think I heard recently that there was someone who works primarily as a nurse, but she also has an addiction counseling license. And so she's licensed under the Board of Nursing, but also licensed under the BSRB. So how you divide your time between the professions, some of that is kind of complicated too, or our survey results from the survey revealed that as well. There may be some people who maintain a license to provide supervision, or there may be some people who hold a license because of the identity, or some people who work in academic where they are not providing direct services to clients, but they are providing beneficial knowledge and skills as it relates to the profession. And so it's kind of like there's also been some studies that have talked about attorney workforce shortages, but that kind of assumes that all attorneys are what you think of as traditional attorney roles, where everybody's in a courtroom. Whereas, I have a law license, I'm an attorney, but I don't practice traditionally as an attorney. So it gets really complicated, but definitely worth looking into and studying more for sure.
Good discussion. And I think when there are reports published like that, I think that's something, Stacy, to your point, to bring to this advisory committee, because I think they can be helpful for us to analyze and look at too. And just as you're saying, some of the things in there were misnomers or maybe not quite as accurate as they could be or should be if we're really trying to, and help workforce solutions. Other thoughts about discussion items?
I wanted to go back to the compact thing. I was trying to remember, you were talking about the survey earlier, and something I remembered is I think that was, and I don't know if this is directly related to compact that you're talking about, Dr. Haben, but there was a lot of discussion in there about people trying to get their licenses transferred between states. Maybe they're moving from Missouri to here or Colorado to here. And I know we've had some discussion about some of that. I was trying to see if I could go back. It just has been so many meetings ago that we talked, that David, you've talked about that. And I can't remember what was happening with that that could be related to this. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and start this conversation just to kind of frame it a little bit, because some of the other professions have been able to pursue a multi-state compact, and a lot of that has been through obtaining funding through some grant funding that was made available through the Department of Defense initially. Organizations were able to essentially apply for that, and a lot of that was driven by associations for the professions versus regulatory boards. They often would apply for it and then putting together a drafting team to consider what's all going to be included. That's when people from the regulatory boards and other associations would be brought in. But alternatively, there was also an approach that said, we'll look at the multi-state compacts, but we'll also look at traditional licensure as well. And is there a way to help people get licensed when they're moving between states, or they may just want to become licensed in multiple states? And so one approach to that was something called universal licensure. And so there were some bills that came through pretty close to around 2021, 2022. There was a version of that passed in Kansas that was never really called universal licensure. So it's been a little complicated, but a lot of the things line up with what those goals were, which was to say, we would like there to be a shorter period of time where if someone is licensed in another jurisdiction and those requirements or the scope of practice are pretty similar, we would like someone to be able to get licensed in another state without too much length of time. And so when that bill went through Kansas, we had an existing statute that said, here's a reciprocity pathway where someone could get licensed if they're already practicing in another state. But what we had on our books at the time was that you had to practice, I believe, 48 of the past 54 months. And then there were some other requirements as well. What the universal licensure law that passed in 21 did, it was primarily focused at military members, military spouses, but when it was finalized, it also applied to individuals that reside in Kansas or those that intend to reside in Kansas. And the length of time for that was 12 months. And so after that bill was passed, it created two different standards, which created some conflicts with our office because we had people that were intending to move to Kansas or had just moved to Kansas that had a 12-month time period before they could get licensed if they were practicing in another state. Whereas you had some individuals that maybe just lived right across the border state into Missouri or, another state like that, and they wanted to get licensed in Kansas, and they said, I'm a Missouri resident, I'm not military, I'm not a military spouse, so I'm going to get licensed in Kansas too. Why do I have to wait 4 years when this person who just moved there can do it in 1 year? And so the board really focused on workforce solutions, had really good discussions about that, and ultimately put forward the bill in 23 that lowered those regular reciprocity requirements down to 12 months to match what that universal licensure bill had put in place. So that has been a movement separate from the compacts that still sort of goes with traditional state licensure, but basically asks the question, what is the difference between someone who's licensed as a marriage and family therapist in this state versus that state? And if we can find some common, qualifications, does there really need to be a long length of time before you can get licensed in those states? And so I think that's been successful. And Leslie could comment on that too, probably because she's worked with a lot of applicants who've come through that reciprocity. But it did allow us to license people more quickly through those changes. So right now, we don't really have a lot of people that qualify for the universal licensure law because by changing our existing statute, people generally don't even get to that point. They usually just come through very quickly through our own statutory requirements. So.
Okay. That's really helpful. I don't know if I remember the information about what you said about how some of the other professions, like all that, the funding pieces and associations and those kinds of things. That's really interesting. I didn't realize that. So
yeah, and some of those associations, the national level, they've also been helpful in terms of putting forward initial funding. So they get the grant from the Department of Defense, but then I know on the counseling side, the American Counseling Association said, we are willing to cover some of the cost to get this set up in the right way. So they did get the grant, but then they also pledged financial support for the social work compact. NASW has not really pledged financial support, but the Association of Social Work Boards, ASWB, has basically come in and applied for a HRSA grant to get some of that funding. And then they've also been able to financially back the launch of that compact as well. And so that's usually kind of how it works. Usually the associations at the national level applied for that Department of Defense grant funding that was made available. And then they also kind of were ready to provide some initial financial support with the ultimate goal of once it goes live, you want the compact to stand on its own and be funded through one mechanism or another that's sort of independent.
So it kind of sounds like, I mean, part of our role is one, making sure people understand some of the things that are available to help them to be able to get licensed when they're moving across states, but also to advocate at the association level, if it's something that they feel like is important for Kansas to look at, like along with other states, obviously, especially like our bordering ones. I mean, that those are the ones that I hear most about is Missouri, Colorado, Oklahoma. I don't hear about Nebraska as much, but some. But those are the ones that I end up hearing a lot about, and so that might be something we encourage people to talk about at the association level too.
Right, thank you for that. Other discussion items that we might want to bring forward?
I
Okay,
feel like
well,
this was,
yeah.
sorry,
No, go
this was
ahead.
like very briefly touched on, but I think it's worth looking at the board ethics and seeing how they relate to the new AAMFT ethics as well.
Okay. Yeah, and generally speaking, and Dave could speak to this, our regulations don't have to fall in line with those because we're separate entities. But I think if you look at like the unprofessional conduct standards, we have tried to align some of those things, and then align them consistently across the professions too. Okay, that's a good item. Other thoughts? Well, we had a lighter agenda today, so it looks like we've got our next meeting is scheduled for April 10th at 10 a.m. And again, please, in the meantime, if you have other discussion items that come of mind, let us know. But we'll start crafting our agendas based on some of these suggestions today. We'll send out so that you have it, the updated AAMFT Code of Ethics if you don't have those, and then also the technology and AI standards that was done by the counseling board. Any other things before we close it? Oh, Chris.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Mary, when we were doing our scheduling for the year, I was anticipating having a supervision training on the 3rd of April, and it's on the 10th that I need to be at. So unfortunately, I don't anticipate being able to participate next time, which would probably also impact Stacy and Betsy. So we are trying to see if we can maybe change the schedule here on that to accommodate this, but I'm not confident we'll be able to do that. So there will be 3 of us that may not be able to attend next time. I think there would still be enough for quorum if everybody else came. But I wanted to let you know that and apologize because when we were first scheduling, I was planning on the 3rd.
Yeah. Okay. So I think thank you for bringing that up. This is a great time while we have everybody to look at that. Dave, do you see any conflicts on the 3rd or the 24th? I have a conflict on the 17th.
I don't see any conflict with our calendar if that was moved to, we're talking about April 3rd. Correct?
April 3rd or the 24th, yeah.
Okay.
Is there a better day for this committee?
April 3rd is the Jurich conference at Kansas State University. So I don't know if people are going to that besides me, but I will not be there.
Does the 24th work for everyone? Stacy, were you saying no? I was trying to do the head nods.
I have clients already booked, so I would not be able to deviate from our time. And so I was balancing whether I would attend this or attend the supervision thing. So yeah. Would we still have a quorum if everybody else was to attend on the 10th?
With 3 people out, I think it could get really touchy for us. So I would rather move to a
Okay.
date where we knew more people could be there. Since we're a small group anyway. So did it sound like the 3rd worked better for everyone, or the 24th? I sort of lost track of that, sorry.
Oh, and I don't know if this will influence anyone's decision. I have a note here. Actually, I'll put a pin in that. Hang on one second. Feel free to continue talking. I'll just double check.
Okay.
I can do the 3rd pretty easily. The 24th, I would just maybe be late. So I just don't know. We're getting braces that day. So during that.
That's lots of fun. Lots of fun.
I'm free either way, so.
Okay.
I don't know if this will influence anyone's decision. I was just double checking a note on my calendar, which it turned out it was correct. That Friday, if it's the 3rd, that is Good
It is
Friday.
Good Friday.
So if anyone, that would potentially could affect things there. So just wanted to throw that out there. I had a little note, but I wanted to make sure that my calendar wasn't pulling up a wrong reference. So.
Which is probably why we moved our supervision training.
Okay, so I'm going to suggest the 24th then, if there aren't any conflicts, knowing that people will probably be out for both of those things.
Okay, well, we'll send out a notification. I know Marcy's not here today, but we'll make sure that she's aware too, and we'll have just the calendar appointment that was already sent out for the 10th. We'll just have my staff member will move that to the 24th. So you shouldn't really see very much, except it'll just move to a different date. You'll have to confirm that.
I apologize for the impact, but
I'm glad you brought it up. It's easier to get this conversation here sometimes than the doodle polls. Okay, any other business? If not, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Bye.
All right. Thank you all so much for your time today. I appreciate each one of you and have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.